Alrighty, it is time, I suppose, for the 2023 Stanley Cup Playoffs. And joining me to discuss that is Matthew Zator of the HockeyWriters.com. You can follow him on Twitter at Matthew ZatorSC. Matthew, how you doing? It's time for the playoffs.
Yeah, finally. Unfortunately, both our teams are not there. So,
Yeah.
but we'll enjoy hockey nonetheless. So, yeah, it's still an exciting times and probably some good hockey coming up.
Yeah, it can be, I would say when your team's not in it, I think especially if either of our teams were in it this year, they wouldn't have a chance to do anything. So I think that
Yeah.
maybe changes things a little bit. But yeah, definitely an interesting playoff bracket this year. I think there's a lot of different storylines to get into. We'll get into those here a little bit later. I just want to talk about a couple things from the regular season. What we saw, I think we have to start the guy who was really captivated the league. No surprise that he did so. It's just the way he did it was just ridiculous this year. It's Connor McDavid scoring 153 points. I think what we saw from him this year is something that we haven't seen probably. I don't know if I would say ever, but I guess you go back to Gretzky and because I think like scoring 150 points in this era is just. I don't think anybody other than him is capable of doing that, and he did it by a mile. The only guy close to him was his teammate. Just overall thoughts on the historic perspective and what we saw from Connor McDavid this year.
Well, I mean, he's been amazing since he's come into the league, really. But he's just been getting better every year. And you'd think that he couldn't get any better. And now he's like in the realm of, Gretzky, Lemieux. And those are guys that had those types of points for a long time before someone else to do it again. And I don't know if this is going to be the only season he'll do it in. But, I mean, the way he's playing, I think he'll probably do it again next season. But we'll have to see. But I mean, the biggest thing is going to be the playoffs. I mean, if he doesn't perform in the playoffs, I mean, the regular season means nothing. Lemieux and Gretzky both did it in the postseason as well. And I mean, though McDavid had a great playoffs last season too. So we'll have to see if he can do it in coming up. But yeah, his regular season was just off the charts.
Yeah, I think you look at kind of the numbers, and it's like the last few seasons he's been healthy. He played all 56 in the shortened season. He played 64 of, I believe, like 70 in the season that got suspended. He played 80 last year and 82 this year. And then you look at points per game, 1.88 in 2020-21, 1.54 last season. But, that's still way over a point per game. And, I mean, he had 123 points, so it's not bad. And then obviously 1.87 this year. So, yeah, he's just been doing this for so long, and I feel like it's something that definitely was expected for him to be an absolute superstar coming in. But the consistency, this is now a number of seasons straight, 3 seasons straight with 100-plus points. He had 97 in the shortened season or the season that got suspended, and then 3 more 100-point seasons before that. So you're looking at 8 seasons, and you're looking at 6 seasons with 100-plus points, and you're looking at 2 other seasons where he was still over a point per game. So there's really no argument for best player in the league right now. It kind of starts and ends with McDavid, and I think that it's been that way for a while, but this season more than ever really solidified that because, I mean, if you win the scoring title by 25 points and you score 153 points in this era, and he could have easily had 100 assists, I think, 89 assists, 64 goals. It's just it's stupid, and I really hope. Now, my prediction in the playoffs is not good for him in terms of his team, but I hope that they go on a run. I think it'd be great for the league. And another big story this season was Erik Karlsson scoring 100 points. First time since 1992 you get a defenseman scoring 100-plus points. Yossi had 96 last season. Karlsson gets 100. I think this would have been – it was already a pretty big story in the league, but obviously would have been a lot bigger if the Sharks were remotely competitive, which they weren't. But Karlsson kind of reminding people who he is. I mean, I would say I don't know if disaster is the right word, but the last couple of years have been rough. Hasn't stayed healthy and hasn't scored very much. Like, he hasn't had a 60-plus point season in San Jose before this season. So, just thoughts on him scoring 101 points this year. 76 assists is no joke. And it took a long time for him to get going in San Jose, but he does it this season. It didn't really mean much because they weren't good, but I mean, I'm sure it means a lot for his career. And obviously he'd probably be on a contender right now if his contract wasn't so ridiculous.
Yeah. I mean, we talk about McDavid, and then, I mean, Karlsson just goes and does a historic thing too. And I don't know if we're not sure he's going to do it again. Probably won't. I mean, he is a 60-point defenseman for the most part. A lot of the time he's been around that range. But I think a big thing for him is not having Brent Burns there. And he's the star. He's the guy. And even in Ottawa, he was the guy, and he put up 70 plus points one season there. And, you know, I don't know if it's a coincidence that the season Brent Burns is not there, all of a sudden he explodes for 100 points. Again, we'll see next season if he does it again. Then you're like, okay, then maybe it was just because he was in the shadow of Burns, and now he's the main defenseman, plays all minutes, plays over 30 minutes a night, plays on every situation. Probably win the Norris Trophy, even though, I mean, I have different standards for a Norris Trophy. I mean, it shouldn't just be points. You got guys that are doing doing the similar things, and they're not even in it. Quinn Hughes, and he's not even talked about. So, and Karlsson will probably win it just based on that 100-point season. Not taking anything away from him. I mean, that's amazing. But is he the best defensively? What was he, a minus 20, 30 or something like that?
Yeah.
So, I mean, I don't know. We'll see. But I think Karlsson is definitely had a great season, and we'll just have to see if he can do it again. If he does, then, I mean, he's back into that elite status at 30 plus. So
yeah, it takes a lot away from the award when you just look at it and you're like, he scored the most points. And that's definitely a tough way for the awards to be voted on. I think it's a problem in a lot of sports. I mean, most of the awards this season in the NHL, I think, are fairly cut and dry in terms of who should win and who shouldn't win. But the Norris Trophy is always an interesting one because I think there's so much bias with, points being scored, especially with this era in the NHL. But we'll see. I think he probably does end up winning it. Whether he deserves it or not remains to be seen. But he had a great season, no doubt. And then the third story is just the fact that I remember us doing a preseason podcast. This was on the Blue Note podcast before that one stopped being aired, or whatever you want to say about it, before it stopped going. But we did a preseason podcast, and I remember all three of us, myself, you, and Mike Meyer, I remember us being not so high on the Boston Bruins this season. And I had them sneaking into the playoffs as the fourth team in the Atlantic. They did a lot more than that. They did something that this has got to be, in terms of the expectations versus the reality, maybe one of the most improbable seasons in the history of the league, because what the Bruins did this year is ridiculous. Because number one, you had an aging core that hadn't done anything in the postseason for 4 years after they lost in the Cup final in terms of like a super deep run. And you had not a first time, but his first year as the head coach there, Jim Montgomery, who was good in Dallas, obviously didn't get fired in Dallas for things that happened on the ice. They go 65, 12, and 5, and just have one of the most absurd seasons we've ever seen. And if anything, if that tells us anything in recent history, is that they're probably going to get knocked out of the postseason way too early. Who knows with this team, though? You look at the experience that they have, and I guess we could have said the same thing about Tampa 4 years ago, the experience they had coming in. Stamkos and Hedman, those guys have already been on a deep run before that. But one thing that scares me a little bit about this Bruins team in the playoffs for their sake is goaltending. Now, these guys were fantastic this season. Ullmark had an unbelievable season. Swayman had an unbelievable season. I would make the argument that Ullmark shouldn't win the Vezina because of how good Swayman was. I would probably give it to Ilya Sorokin. I know that's not going to happen, but I mean, if we just look at it like that, I think that is something to think about. But they just historic season. You get 61 goals from Pasternak. He scores 113 points. If you have a guy playing on the wing that's a pure goal scorer and he's still scoring 113 points, I mean, that is absurd. They get the extension done with him. Everybody else was solid. They had so many different scoring options because they had 5 guys with 20 plus goals and 10 guys with 10 plus goals. I guess 11 with Foligno having 10. But yeah, just a ridiculous season for the Bruins, and one that certainly was not expected by us.
Well, I just pulled up my notes on the predictions from that podcast. I had the Bruins second to last in the division, right above the Canadiens. So I'm safe to say I was wrong. And I had the Panthers winning the division. Again, wrong, totally.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, I didn't expect the Bruins. I thought those injuries at the beginning of the season were just going to destroy them. Being Marchand came back early, but I thought he was going to be out to December. We thought McAvoy was going to be a huge loss until he got back. Grzelcyk was injured at the beginning of the season. He came back earlier than expected as well. But even without them, they had great. Hampus Lindholm just stepped up and became a top-end defenseman for them. And now, he's still pretty good, but now he's got the support around him. It's just amazing on what this team has done. I don't know, again, this won't mean as much if they get kicked in the first round by the Florida Panthers. I don't see it happening, but we'll get to that later. But I think the Bruins are, again, something that hasn't been done since 76, 77 was when the Canadiens had that record, and it's held for this long. Now, granted, I still say that's an asterisk because the thing is, back then they didn't have shootouts. They didn't have overtime 3-on-3. They had ties and all that. So I think that's still an amazing season back from historical perspective. But what the Bruins have done, 65 wins, 135 points. That's just unheard of. So, we'll see what happens to the playoffs, but they had an amazing regular season that is probably going to go down in history for, again, another 20 years or something.
Yeah, and it's not that it was out of nowhere, but it wasn't expected. I think I would say 95% of people that make legitimate NHL season predictions would not have picked them to finish probably in the top 2 of the division, I would say. So, and you look at the comparables, is the 2019 Tampa team. That team had 128 points. They had 62 wins. The Bruins were 65 and 135 points. Goals for, that Tampa team was first. This Bruins team second. Goals against, the Bruins were first this season, and the Tampa Bay Lightning then were fifth. So that's the comparable. Obviously, if you're a Bruins fan, you hope that you don't get swept in the first round, which Tampa did by Columbus, and opens the door for another team to win a cup, which I think this season, though, more than that season, I think a lot of people were just so heavily in on Tampa winning the cup. I think there's a lot of other options this season, a lot of other things that could happen, because I think the Eastern Conference has some very heavy hitters. And we saw that a lot in the regular season, how open the West is. And then the East, there's so many loaded rosters in there.
Yeah.
And, Florida is a team that wasn't as good this season as they were last season, but they have dangerous scoring up front. And they're a team that's probably playing with a bit of a chip on their shoulder, given how last season ended for them. And it took a little bit for them to sneak into the playoffs this season, but not an easy first-round matchup. I would say a much harder first-round matchup, no offense to Columbus, than Tampa had that season. So no offense to them. And I was kind of looking at my preseason predictions a little bit. Just not even close in a lot of situations. I had Seattle finishing last in their division, which whoops.
Yeah.
The Central, I had obviously overvalued Nashville and St. Louis. I think the Atlantic I did okay, given the fact that I did get 4 playoff teams from there. I also overvalued Columbus. That's a classic don't do move. That's a classic. They signed the big free agent. Don't think they're going to be great automatically next season. Was the mistake I had there. But overall, I'm not going to pick the Stanley Cup final that I picked in the preseason, which was I had Florida over Colorado in 7. Still in play, but feels very unlikely. I also had Pittsburgh getting the Eastern Conference final, so another mistake there. And Pittsburgh lost to Chicago to essentially end their season. So that's not great. But I'm going to try to do better with these playoff predictions. So let's get into a little bit here. One thing to discuss before the playoffs is the fact that we don't have Sidney Crosby. We don't have Alex Ovechkin. And the defending champs are going to be without their captain, who they've been without this entire time. They're going to be without him for the entire postseason as well. So that opens the door a little bit for other teams. Any thoughts on the fact that we don't have Sid or Ovi in these playoffs?
Yeah, that's something that hasn't happened in a long time. We at least had one of them, and most of the time both
Yeah.
in the playoffs. So that's pretty crazy to have both those superstars out and their teams out, because both their teams have had consecutive playoff streaks for quite a while as well, and now they're not competing. So yeah, it just goes to show you how much this league is the parity in it, and some teams can come in and take these other teams out. And yeah, the Capitals and the Penguins were both in it towards the end, but ended up not making it. So yeah, pretty crazy that those two guys aren't competing in the playoffs this year.
Yeah, I was very low on the Capitals going into the season, and it wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be, but it also doesn't help them or the Penguins that we saw a team like New Jersey be as good as they were,
Yeah.
and we saw the Islanders come around late, and we saw Carolina, who probably wouldn't be where they are, like the Svechnikov injury, they did not look good after. So I don't think they would have as many points as they do right now if he was healthy,
Mm.
um, or if he wasn't healthy the entire season, I should say. So all right, I'm going to start in the West because it's not less intriguing, but there's a little bit less there in terms of matchups and who could win, who can't win. Let's start in the Pacific with those two matchups. The first one is Vegas and Winnipeg. Um, I think Vegas is poised for a bit of a deep run. You look at the health aspect for them; they're a bit more healthy than they were. Obviously, Stone possibly coming back, I believe, at some point. That's a factor here. And I think that they kind of loaded up a little bit in terms of their defense is still there. And you bring in a Barbashev at the deadline. That's a guy that plays the playoff style that you're looking for. And you got a Vegas team that probably should have had a little bit more playoff success than they did after that first season. So I am taking Vegas in 6 in this series. No offense to Winnipeg. I think goaltending, they could possibly steal a series here with Hellebuck, but I just think Vegas is better, and I'm going to approach it that way here. I'll take Vegas in 6.
Yeah, I'm on the Vegas train too. I think they seem to be able to this season, score throughout their lineup, so they're not relying on a few guys. Mark Stone could be back to start the playoffs as well, which is huge for them. And goaltending, I don't know. I mean, it's going to depend on if Brossoit. I think Brossoit is starting. Game 1, but they got Jonathan Quick there. They got Logan Thompson, so they can turn to like 3 goaltenders if one doesn't work out. And Quick has all that playoff experience that they can lean on. So I think yeah, Vegas. I'm going to go Vegas but I'm going to go and put it to 7. I think Vegas is going to win this in 7. I think Hellebuck's going to have a heck of a series, and that's why it's going to be close. So I'll go Vegas in 7.
All right, then we have Edmonton and LA. This is a rematch of last season in the first round. The Oilers won that in 7. I mean, McDavid willed them in that game 7 to the finish line. I think it's going to be a little bit of a flipping of the script here. I think LA's better this season than they were last season. I think their young guys are in a much, they're much more developed this season than they were last season. And they have the veteran experience to lean on. They brought in Kevin Fiala, who's been a stud for them, and they, also Arvidsson's there, so a lot of goal scoring opportunities there, plus the experience, plus the back end is solid. So I'll take LA in 7, and this would be devastating for Edmonton. I don't know where Edmonton would go from there. From a loss here, I don't know where you go, because at some point you can't just have McDavid and Draisaitl sitting there not winning in the playoffs. But I will say what the Oilers did at the trade deadline could help them win a playoff series like this. So I'm going to take the Kings in 7, but for the sake of McDavid, I hope it doesn't happen, I'll say.
This is going to be a long series too. I think it is going to 7, but I'm going to pick Edmonton in this. I think they've got enough to go over the Kings just like they did in the last year's one. And they are better. I think their defense, like adding Matthias Ekholm, was just an amazing move. Something that came out of nowhere for me. I didn't think that Ekholm would go there, but he's fit in perfectly with Evan Bouchard and made him better, which is great. And then I think it's going to come down to the goaltending. Stuart Skinner isn't good. I mean, Jack Campbell, who knows what you got with him. If both, I mean, this was a done series pretty quick. If their goaltending doesn't hold up. Although last season their goaltending wasn't that good either.
Yeah.
Mike Smith was up and down. So, and they made it through. So that's why I'm going 7, but I'm going to say Edmonton will sneak out of it.
Yeah, there was a lot of matchups in that series last year where Edmonton had to score a lot. Although there was a couple games where you're like, okay, I still think LA is probably a year away, and I think that's probably the case. But there was a game where they gave up 5. There was a game where they gave up 4. There was a game where they gave up 4. A couple shutouts, though, surprisingly. But I do think Edmonton or LA is further along this year than they were last year. So I'll take the Kings. We got Colorado and Seattle matching up here. Pretty tough first series to run into for Seattle in franchise history, their first. But the Avs, a little bit vulnerable, maybe not in this series, but eventually without Landeskog there, it's going to be a bit of a problem. Plus, you have other questions in terms of injuries for Colorado. It hasn't been the healthiest season for Cale Makar as well. So I like Seattle. I think they're going to be a fun team. I think a lot of people are going to be rooting for them. But I think the Avalanche are too much. I will take the Avs in 6.
Yeah, I mean, the Avalanche, there's going to be, obviously, like you said, question marks going in. Like, they don't know their second line center without Nazem Kadri. That's been a question mark all season. So I'm going to say the Avs do get out of this, but I keep picking 7-game series. But
I hope you're right.
This is a tough one to call. I think it is. I think Colorado does get out of it, and I think it is in 7. So, but Seattle will put up a fight, especially at home, because that atmosphere is amazing in Seattle, and I think that's going to push them to some wins. So Avs in 7.
All right, then we have Minnesota, Dallas. I'm just going to keep going the other way in terms of the length of series. I think the Stars are as well built as anybody to win a cup this year. I'm going to take the Stars in 5. I just think that I think when they are playing well, they are so much better than Minnesota. And that's no slight to Minnesota. I just think that that's how it is. They're deeper. They have a better goaltender. They have, I mean, Joe Pavelski plays like he's like 29 years old still. And you have Sagan healthy. Jamie Benn had a great season. Obviously, Jason Robertson's a superstar. So I think this is such a bad matchup for Minnesota. I think it's going to be ugly. It's going to be another first-round exit for them. I'm taking the Stars in 5.
Yeah, I was on the preview show for this one, representing the Stars, and I believe, I can't fully remember what I picked, but I know I picked the Stars to come out of this series, and I believe I said 6. So I'm going to say I'll keep with that prediction and go the Stars in 6. Basically what you basically said. I mean, I think they're just a much more well-rounded team. They can play any style. They're top 10 in a lot of categories this year: power play, penalty kill, goals for, goals against, face-up percentage. They're very sneaky. They're a sneaky good team. I mean, they got the goal scoring. Like, Robertson had an amazing season. Pavelski again. Ben had a resurgent season. He hadn't put up 30 goals for like a few seasons before now. So I think they're just much, and Wyatt Johnston is there too, and he's a rookie, and he put up a ton of points. So I think it's got a lot of weapons, and Heiskanen with his 73 points too. They're just, I think it's gonna be too much for the Wild to handle. So I'm gonna say 6 for the Stars.
All right, let's bounce over to the Eastern Conference. We talked about it a little bit already. Boston and Florida in the first round. If you're Boston, you probably would have rather played the Islanders here. Would have been a much easier series, but the Bruins need to avoid the dreaded early exit of a President's Trophy winner, or the dreaded early exit of a historic season, which Tampa had 4 years ago. I think the Bruins do it. I think this is a team with just so much experience in the playoffs, and they're just so hard to play against, especially in Boston. I think this is a tough spot for Florida, but I think they play well and they lose in 6, although I could see this one going 7, but I think the Bruins can get it done in 6. So I'll go Bruins in 6.
Yeah, I go with Bruins here too. I think it's going to be a much shorter series, though. I'll go 5. I think Bruins in 5. I don't know about the Panthers. I mean, they're a question mark for me. Alex Lyon is going to be their starting goaltender to start. I mean, he's had a great season since he came, but I don't know how he's going to be against the Bruins that just seem to be just unstoppable. They just seem to be able to be again, another team that can play any style you want. I mean, they can run up the score. They can play a really low scoring game as well. I don't know if the Panthers are going to be able to handle it. I think they'll win one game. I won't say a sweep, so I'll say just the Bruins will win in 5.
All right, now we have Toronto, Tampa, and once again, here we are with Toronto. Just getting back on the horse if you're the Maple Leafs here. You haven't won in the first round in 19 years. You got to get it done at some point, and you got another shot at Tampa. And let's be honest, I think the Leafs outplayed the Lightning in that series last season that they lost. Yeah. I think they outplayed them, and they lost, but I think the Leafs are better this year. And I think Ryan O'Reilly is a huge part of that. Like, if you can get that guy, like every season that Ryan O'Reilly played in St. Louis in the playoffs, he was as elite as he could be. Like last season, he was great in the playoffs. Obviously, 2019, he was great. I think that's a big, and I think Nola Chari is another guy that can give you something in the playoffs as well. It's another guy that's played in the Cup final before. So I think they made the right additions in that regard. I think they did the same on the blue line as well, a little bit more than they have in the past. Goaltending, you still never know what you're going to get. But I feel like I should have put Leafs in 7, but I put Leafs in 6. I think Tampa's due for an early exit. They've played so much hockey the last few years, and I just think they're going to go down. I know that they lost in the first round 4 years ago, but we'll just act like that never happened because they won the next 2 cups and then lost the third one. But I will say Leafs in 6 finally happens.
I'm going to go with the Leafs in this one too. I think like you say, the Lightning have just played so much hockey, and it looks like they've fatigued down the stretch. Looking at just so much hockey and the years that they've played, they've gone all the way, the distance in all 3 seasons here. They're just too much. I think it's going to catch up to them. It can't go 7 though. I think if it does go into a game 7, Lightning going through, because Vasilevsky just has this it seems like an out of this world ability to step up in the game 7 and win. So I don't think the Maple Leafs want to put him in that position again. So I'm going to say in 6, and if it does go 7, I'm going Lightning, but I think this will go in 6 for the Maple Leafs.
Yeah, if you're the Leafs, you got to avoid the game 7, like you said. Maybe the series that I'm looking forward to the most in terms of watching is the Devils and Rangers. Just going to be a really fun battle. I do think the Devils are kind of in the same spot as the Kings were last season, where I still think they're a year away from truly contending and going deep. I think the Rangers were in that spot a couple years ago. Mm-hmm. Obviously, the Rangers went to the conference final last season, lost to Tampa. I think this one needs to go 7. I think it would be great if it went 7. So I'm going to try to will that into existence by saying it. And I'm going to say Rangers in 7 in this series.
Yeah, I would love this series to go to 7. So I'm going to say 7, and we'll do a double and try to get it to go into the universe. Yeah. I'll say, but I'm going to go the other way. I'm going to say the Devils are going to come out of this one. This team has just had such a great season, and I mean, I think their goaltending Vanacek has been amazing, but Shesterkin is he's starting to look like that Vezina Trophy winner type goaltender lately. So if it comes down to a goaltender duel, I think the Rangers come out of it, but I'm going to go with the Devils in 7 because I think they're just going to have a different style that I think will beat the Rangers, but it could go either way. That's why it's going to 7. So I'll say the Devils though.
I hope so. I think Shesterkin this season, it feels like there's been a lot said, whether it's from Rangers fans or just people like, what happened to the Shesterkin of last season, all this stuff. And like, he went 37-13-8 with a 9.16 and a 2.48 goals against. I feel like that's still fairly elite or close to it. If it's not, I mean, the save percentage you'd like to be a little bit better, but he also had a 9.35 last season, so it's hard to follow that up. But the Rangers are interestingly built because you have Patrick Kane there now, you have Vladimir Tarasenko there now, you have all the scoring you could get. Defensively, we'll see what happens, but definitely going to be a huge series for Igor Shesterkin, no doubt. All right, final first round series in the East, Carolina and the New York Islanders. I probably would have said Canes in 4 or 5 if Svechnikov was healthy, but that's a big loss. And I think the Hurricanes still win this series, but I worry about them without Svechnikov. So I will take the Canes in 6.
Yeah, that was a huge loss when they lost him. And then Pacioretty going out as well. I mean, yeah, he only played like a handful of games when he came back from injury, but he is a big loss to the lineup. And then you lose Svechnikov too, and that's just massive. I mean, Necas has had a great season, so he's gonna have to take that brunt of that offensive production and perform in the playoffs. They have a lot of back end offense, though. I mean, Brent Burns has been had a great season again. And led the defense. So it's gonna be tough, but I'm gonna say it does go the Canes' way, and it will go. I'll say 6 as well. I think the Islanders will win a couple just because of that, and they snuck in. And if Bo Horvat can have a great playoffs like he did the last time he was in the bubble, I think the Islanders do take this one. But I don't know. I don't think Horvat will do that again. So I'm gonna go with Canes in 6.
Should be an interesting series for sure, especially the result will be more interesting than almost anything. Because I think it could go either way. All right, let's get into the second round. My first matchup here is Vegas and LA. This is an interesting series because Vegas, Jonathan Quick, do they throw him out there against LA? What's the motivation there? If he plays, I think that could get very interesting. But I think Vegas is better overall. But I would like to see LA go on another deep run. Obviously they've been spoiled in the past with the 2 cups in 2012 and 14, but it's been a while since then. So why not? But that being said, I'm going to take Vegas in 6 in this series. I think Vegas, like I said, I expect a deep run from them. This is a core that's had some success in the playoffs in terms of winning around each year or, winning. I mean, Bruce Cassidy's also historically won a lot of playoff games. So first season under him could change things in this regard. But I'm going to go Vegas in 6 over LA. And I believe you have Vegas, Edmonton.
Vegas, Edmonton. Yeah, it's this will be a really good series, I think, too. My gosh, I'm gonna go with I'll go Edmonton. I think they would get through a Vegas series. I think again, if they get through that first one and McDavid and Draisaitl are just lighting it up, I think they've just got so much depth to match Vegas. But I think again, it's going to 7 in this one, so I'll go Vegas, not Vegas, Oilers in 7.
All right, my next second round matchup in the West is Colorado and Dallas. This would be a great series. But like I said earlier, I think Colorado could run out of gas at some point in the playoffs. I think it comes here. I honestly think Dallas wins this series in 7, but they get out to Dallas gets out to a 3-1 series lead. Colorado comes back, makes it 3-3, and then Dallas prevails with the goaltending because Dallas would have won a round last season if they had a competent team in front of Jake Ottinger in that game. So I think it happens this season. I'll take Dallas in 7, setting up a Dallas and Vegas conference final.
Yeah, I'll go. I have the same matchup, so I'll go Dallas in this one. Again, same thing. I think they're very sneaky in all areas, and I think Colorado is they've got so many question marks that I don't know if the goaltending will hold up. Like you said, Georgiev is a good goaltender, but Ottinger, if he gets through that first round and he's amazing, he's just a better goaltender. So I'll go the same, and so it'll be Dallas. Oilers, Western Conference, the next round there.
Heads would explode. Boston, Toronto, round 2. Seen this movie before. This year's Boston team, as dominant as they were, get to a game 7. I think if you're Toronto and I think most of the time if you're a fan of any team, you don't really want to play in a game 7, but especially if you're Toronto, I think they got to break that at some point. They're going to go on a deep run and win one. So I'm going to say Toronto in 7. Over Boston, and that would be very interesting to see what Twitter would look like on a night like that.
Yeah, I mean, that would, again, amazing second round series. And I think, I don't know, the way Boston, I just feel like they're a team of destiny this year. I think Boston's, you can see where I'm going with this. I think Boston's will win this series, and it will go 7, but I think Boston's coming out.
I think Leafs fans would probably handle a second round loss to Boston better than most at this point, because I feel like just winning a round's a huge part of moving forward here. But I'd be very curious to see what happens with Kyle Dubas if they lose in the second round, or even if they lose in the first round. I think it becomes very interesting, because I think if you're the Pittsburgh Penguins, you make a phone call there, I would think. Who knows? But I have Toronto going pretty deep. Rangers Hurricanes. We've seen this series a couple times in the playoffs before. I saw it last season and ended with the Rangers in winning that series. I have the Rangers in 6. I just think Carolina, it's just Svechnikov being out. Like you said, they lost Pacioretty, which he didn't contribute a whole lot, but would have been a huge contributor in the playoffs, I think, for them where he plays. But I just don't think Carolina has enough to get through a series here. So I'm going to take the Rangers in 6 over the Canes, setting up a Rangers-Leafs.
I got Devils Hurricanes in the second round here, and I really have this feeling about New Jersey. We'll see. I mean, our predictions haven't been that good in the regular season, so we'll see how it goes. But I'm going to go Devils over the Hurricanes in this one, because again, I think the Devils just have way more depth offensively, and they're really good defensively too. So I'll go with the Devils. So it'll be a Devils Bruins Eastern Conference final.
All right, my Western Conference final, Vegas and Dallas. I think there would be a lot to think about in this series. You have various matchups in this series where you're like, okay, that's kind of weird, but it would be interesting. I think goaltending wise, you have a huge advantage for Dallas with Ottinger, and obviously you have Pete DeBoer, who is in Dallas now, was in Vegas. That's another storyline here. You have some players that have played against each other in some memorable playoff series, and I speak from the perspective of a Blues fan who would probably be the only person to ever mention this, but like Alex Pietrangelo, Jamie Benn, they have an interesting history. So them in the playoffs here would be interesting to watch. But I think the Stars get it done in 7. I just think Dallas and Vegas are clearly, I think, to me, the two most well-equipped teams to win a cup out of the West. But I could see a wild card pushing through, such as in Edmonton, in terms of, I don't know if we expect them to go that deep, but I could see it. It wouldn't surprise me if it happened. But I'm going to take Dallas over Vegas in 7.
All right, so I got the Oilers and the Stars. So this is where the Oilers, unfortunately, they're going to stop short of the Stanley Cup final again. I'm going Stars over the Oilers because basically the biggest thing is goaltending. I think it goes against Ottinger and Skinner. Obviously, Skinner's had a good playoffs up to the end if they're already in the Western Conference final. But Ottinger, I think, he's just such a better goaltender. And I think the Stars as a team in general, again, they're just much more well-rounded than, I mean, the Oilers have gotten better in that regard, but it would be a fun series because you got two of the top scorers. You got Robertson going against, McDavid Draisaitl pairing, and Robertson, that top line of Robertson, Hintz, and Pavelski is just out of this, insane. So I'll go Stars over the Oilers though, because I think it's going to edge them out, and I think it'll go 7 though.
Eastern Conference Final, I have the Rangers and Leafs. Just the atmosphere of both of these arenas would be off the charts in this series. And I think that, weirdly enough, you have the Oilers losing in the conference final back-to-back years because they lost last season. You have them losing this season. I have the Rangers losing in the conference finals back-to-back years. So the Leafs keep it alive for Canada, and I don't really know how Canada feels about that. I feel like I've read some stuff, at least from a Montreal perspective, where you'd almost be rooting against another Canadian team, especially if it were Toronto. I don't really know the dynamics there, but I would take the Leafs in 7 over the Rangers. I think the Leafs are just going to go on one of those magical runs, and it might not end well. It might not end in the best way possible, but I think that the Leafs are going to do it at some point, and why not this season?
Yeah. So I got the Bruins in here with the Devils. So, but I mean, when you go against each other here, I think the Bruins come out of this one. So Bruins over the Devils in, I'll say 6. I think the Devils would put up a fight. So I've got Stanley Cup final going Dallas Stars and Boston Bruins.
That would be An interesting series, no doubt. I have the Stars and the Leafs, and I usually get behind a team every postseason. It ends poorly. I've done it with Pittsburgh in the past. I'm doing it with Dallas this year. I'm taking Dallas to win the Stanley Cup in 6 games, and I think Jason Robertson is a big reason why as he wins the Conn Smythe. I'm looking at probably 40 points in the postseason around there. So, because, I have him playing, let's see, let's do some quick math there. 13 games there, then 20. So I have him playing 25 games in the playoffs. So 40 points. I think that's, something like 17 goals, 13 assists, or that's not good math, 17 goals, 23 assists for 40 points. So why not? Give me the Stars winning their second Stanley Cup in franchise history over the Maple Leafs. And I just don't know how this would go down on the internet, but it would be interesting to see the Leafs get all the way there and then come up just short. I wouldn't say that I'd be rooting for it, but I also don't want to see Dallas win the cup either, if I'm being honest. So we'll see. I'll take the Stars to win the cup in 6.
Well, I got two teams in the final that I wouldn't want to win cups, but I think if it's a Boston Dallas, I'm going Boston. I just think there's just such, like I said, I think they're a team of destiny, and as much as I hate saying that because the Bruins are just, I don't like them because way back in 2011. So it's, they're a much different team. Obviously, they still have a couple guys that were on that team, but I think there's such a strong team, and I'm going with David Pastrnak as a Conn Smythe Trophy winner in this one because, again, this guy's had an amazing season, over 60 goals. A guy that was drafted in the late first round, and a lot of teams passed him over, and he's just become such a potent goal scorer. I'm going to say the Bruins are just going to ride his coattails right to the final and right to the Stanley Cup. So Pastrnak for Conn Smythe and the Bruins for their first cup since 2011.
Yeah, that would be their, 4th appearance, I believe, since 2011, because they had 11. They lost to Chicago and then lost to St. Louis. And then I also wanted to bring up that they did lose to St. Louis. All right. Yeah. So we'll see. We'll see what happens. We'll talk a little draft here before we get out of here, but we'll obviously reconvene after the playoffs and before the draft again, I'm sure, to discuss that. But let's talk a little bit about the draft now, because the last time that we spoke was on this podcast was maybe a month and a half ago or so. Obviously, I want to ask you first, though, not talking about the draft, something that we haven't talked about yet, and it was a trade that was unexpected for your team, bringing in Philip Roenick. Just overall thoughts on the approach there, the future of the franchise, because it feels like they're a team that's not looking to be bad next season again, especially with the cap situation. You almost can't be. So how do you think about what the Canucks did at the deadline and what they're looking to do moving forward?
Well, I didn't like the trade at the time, and mostly not because of who they got. Hronek had looked really good in the first 5 games I think he played, and then he got shut down for the season. But he was very steady. I think he's a great defenseman for the Canucks for the future, but they gave up way too much, and I still say that. 2 first-round picks, really, I think. You got the first-round pick, and then you got the second, which is going to be an early second. So in this draft, that in my mind is a first-round pick. So you basically gave up 2 big pieces that you could potentially, now looking at it, they would have got the pick because the Islanders made the playoffs. So that pick does become the Detroit Red Wings now, but it would have been the Canucks. So they would have had 2 first-round picks in this draft. One, obviously, top 10 pick, and then another one around the 5th. I don't know. It depends on where the Islanders go in the playoffs. They could, if they win the cup, then it's a 32nd overall pick. But who cares? It's still a first-round pick in this draft, and I hated it. I really did. I was really looking forward to the Canucks having 2 first-round picks in this draft, but now they don't have a second rounder either, unless they do some moving on the draft floor maybe. But yeah, overall, I think Hronek's going to be a good piece for the Canucks moving forward. But I don't think it was worth that cost. As for what they're trying to do, I really don't know what they're trying to do. Are they rebuilding? Are they retooling? Seems like they want to retool. But really with the cap space, can they do to they got to get rid of some big contracts. All of our Ekman Larson contracts, just dead weight. It's just
Yeah.
so big. And then Tyler Myers, he's a good defenseman, but $6 million is just too much. And then you got other guys that potentially could step into the lineup. I mean, I really liked what Hirose has done since they signed him out of the NCAA. Cole McWard was, looked pretty good too, but obviously their defense needs to get better. And I don't know what they'll do in the offseason. I mean, Brock Besser could be on the trade block. They essentially, it seems like they've taken Thatcher Demko off the trade block now. Apparently they're not looking to trade him now. So we'll see. I mean, the offseason is going to be interesting, but I really don't know what their direction is. I think they should be of the mindset of rebuilding and just rebuild around Pettersson and Hughes and just see what they can do. And Demko. I mean, I think those three pieces are there for sure, but we'll see what happens.
Yeah,
It's going to be a fun time to write about the Canucks. That's for
sure. Yeah, they certainly seem like from an outsider like myself, they just seem like they're really lacking a direction, like you said. And I think the Blues were lacking that too until the deadline, but they're still kind of stuck because the defenseman contracts are just horrible. But I am looking forward to seeing what the Blues do with the 3 first-round picks.
Yeah.
I don't think they're going to make all 3. I certainly think they'll make the first one. Doug Armstrong pretty much said as much, but you got 2 other picks to play with there. Maybe make some trades. They're also a team that doesn't have a second-round pick, but they do have 2/3. So we'll see what to do with that. Let's do this first. I have a few questions listed here, but I'm going to go to the second one first. And there's probably 3 teams that have a chance to get Bedard, truly, if you think about the fact that the odds usually don't move that much. But I guess you could say there's 4 or 5. I don't know. There's just such a big gap between San Jose and Montreal in terms of lottery numbers that it's like, I don't know. But what do you think the actual best fit for Connor Bedard is in terms of where he would be going, who he would be playing with, the market a lot of factors to take into account here. What do you think the actual best fit for Bedard is? And just random prediction, where do you see him landing in terms of, like, I could see him playing here?
I think the best fit would be the Montreal Canadiens. I think they're set up for him to just kind of be inserted, and it wouldn't take too long for them to kind of turn into a playoff team. But for the team that probably will get him, I'm going to say the Columbus Blue Jackets are going to be the one getting him, and I think that's a good fit too. Yeah. I think they're another team has a lot of young talent this season. I think is an outlier because of the fact. I mean, how many injuries did they have? It's crazy. I think they led the league in man games lost. So, and losing so many guys they still have the pieces. Johnny Gaudreau, they got Lane, they got some young guys. And Kent Johnson looked ridiculous at times during the season there. They've got so many good guys, and adding Bedard, I think, will push them. And I think they'll end up getting him. And I think that's a good fit. I think he'll actually be pretty good there too. And he even said, I think he said in an interview, he'd be okay going to Columbus too. So
it definitely helps that they brought in a guy like Johnny Gaudreau and they have Line there. And you look at some of the names that were not playing for them at the end of the season. Jake Bean was out. Zach Werenski was out. Line was out. Merzlikins was out. A lot of names out. And the idea of just having a line, or the ability or the capability to have a line of Gaudreau, Bedard, and Line is very intriguing. Just throwing them out there and seeing what happens. I don't think that would be the primary line that he'd play on, but I think that's a great scenario. And it's kind of a tough, I don't know if it's a tough look or just a weird, like Anaheim was an embarrassment this season. I mean, let's just be honest. They were blatantly not trying, and they lost 13 in a row to end the season, which is just, I mean, I don't think that the lottery's rigged by any means. But at the league certainly doesn't want to see Anaheim win the lottery, if I had to guess. And I don't really get anybody but Chicago for me, obviously, in terms of where Bedard goes. But I think it'd be very interesting. I do think Columbus would be the one that I'm rooting for the most to get him. And I wouldn't hate if Anaheim got him. I just think it'd be pretty embarrassing given their season. It was just a joke. But
Columbus has a new coach. Well, they will have a new coach as well. So. I don't know if it was fair that Larson kind of got thrown under the bus.
Yeah, I agree.
But, I mean, injuries happen. What coach is going to be able to deal with all that?
Yeah. Very few. Okay. your top 5 right now are just 5 players at the top of the draft that people should get to know, guys that could be superstars in this draft.
Well, I mean, the obvious one's Bedard, but Adam Fantilli. I mean, what a consolation prize! Whoever gets him as second overall. I mean, if he goes second overall, I'm assuming he will. He's going to be a difference maker for wherever he goes too, and he'd probably be a first overall pick. I want to say he'd be a first overall pick last season for sure. But yeah, what a great guy to get if you don't win the lottery, right? And I have this real bad feeling that he's going to go to Chicago at second overall, and I don't like it because I don't like Chicago. But I think that's where he ends up. I think he's going to be pretty good there too. And I mean, there's so many guys that could become superstars in this top end. You got Leo Carlson. He's another guy that's like could go third, fourth overall, and probably a top 2 pick in a lot of other drafts. There's just so many good guys in this draft that could become big time NHL players. So those are 3 for me. Obviously there's Matvei Michkov as well. I mean, he's 3 years maybe down the road because of his contract situation and, Russia and all that. But whoever gets him is getting a 50 goal scorer, I think, in the NHL. And he could potentially go, I don't know where he'll drop. He may drop into the 6-7 spot and where he probably shouldn't go. So those are definitely guys for me.
Yeah, I think in terms of this draft, I'm obviously excited for the possibility of the Blues to have a pretty good pick in this draft. Obviously, the 10th odds right now. I would take anything inside the top 12. I mean, they certainly could have had I would say they could probably be where Philadelphia is right now if they didn't come in and bring in, Kapanen and Vrana and Blay that were great, obviously great additions and will be a big part of the team next season. But yeah, I think that's an interesting part of this draft is that there's a lot of possibility for guys that would be top 3 last season to possibly fall into your lap if you're in the 7 or 8 spot just because of how good the other players are around them. But one thing I look at this draft and I see is there's a lot more forwards at the top end of the draft than defensemen. So what are your thoughts overall on the defensemen in this draft, especially in the top 20 or so of this draft?
Well, the 2 guys that I look at always is David Reinbacher and Axel Sandin-Pellikka. And, Reinbacher, I think he's going to go in the top 10. I've said this on Prospect Corner a few times too. I think he's just a guy that's risen his stock throughout the season. His World Juniors was really good, and he wasn't even playing healthy in those World Juniors, and he looked really good. So, I think he's going in the top 10 to some team. I think whoever needs a great right-hand defenseman that could probably step into the league in a couple of years, I think he's pretty close. And then Axel Sandin-Pellikka is just one of those, again, skilled Swedish defensemen. Another right-hand shot, which a lot of teams don't have. So I think he'll probably go in the 15 to 20 range, maybe, just because of the forwards that are above him. And that could, again, I hated it because the Canucks could have had a pick around that spot and get a great forward and a great defenseman. But of course, that ship has sailed. So, but yeah, Pellikka is another guy, and those 2 I'm always looking at. I mean, there's some other guys down there too, but those are the big prizes, I think, in the top 20 at least.
Yeah, that's the tough spot that I think the Blues are going to be in with their pick is that they could really use some defensemen to throw into the mix, but there's so many forwards, and there's going to be somebody like Andrew Crystal or Dvorsky or Oliver. One of those guys is going to be there, and you got to make a decision. And usually you tend towards best player available. That's kind of how you want to approach every draft, but it's going to be very hard this season for these teams to draft. Obviously, it could be a good thing down the road, but it's going to be difficult to see how these guys draft or how they view this draft, because I think a lot of teams still kind of just went for it. Toronto went for it by getting rid of some picks, and there's a lot of playoff teams that don't have their first round pick, and I mean, you always got to go for the chance to win a cup, but I feel like in this draft you would like to hold on to them as much as possible. I guess the thing for Toronto is that they already have a pick in the very back end of the draft from Boston, so if they wanted to to just have one, that's fine. But are there any potentially like guys that are rated in the 20s right now that could go forward or kind of hop into the top 15? Some guys that could sneak in and maybe somebody falls out. Are there any of those mid first round guys that could either be steals in that spot or fall or even move up?
Well, you mentioned Andrew Crystal. I think he's a big one. He's interesting because of his being undersized. His skating isn't the best. I think that could work against him, and teams would be like kind of hesitant to pick him in the top 10, 15. But there's also teams that could potentially look at him and say, well, the undersized guys look pretty good in the NHL lately. So he could go in there. Matthew Wood's another one I look at because of his size and his shot. He's got that Tage Thompson type shot. And you know how many goals Thompson has scored this season. Probably don't want to bring him up because he was a St. Louis Blues draft pick and never panned out there. But, I think he could potentially become a guy in the top 15. I hope he does because I keep pushing him up. I keep thinking he should go in there when he may go in the 20s. But yeah, those are two guys that I look at. And Braden Yeager's another one. Riley Height, I think, are two other guys that could be in that range that could push themselves in. There's just so much talent in this draft that you could pick so many different guys that could go different ways. And I think the only ones that are really sure are like a top five are the top five that are going to go there. Some other guys who just push themselves in. So lots of great, exciting prospects that's going to be fun for whatever team gets them because lots of elite talent here.
Yeah, no doubt. No doubt. All right. We will do another one of these to recap the playoffs and discuss the draft before the draft happens at some point. I think that'll be a good one to discuss because we'll be, have a little bit more assurance in the draft order and all that stuff. So the draft will be in late June on the 28th. So we'll be back at some point before then. I'll have you on and we'll discuss that. You could follow his stuff at Matthew Zator SC on Twitter. Check his stuff out in the Hockey Writers, doing some playoff previews right now. Check out the YouTube channel. I'll link all that in the description of this podcast. Matthew, thank you for joining me, and we will talk again soon.
Yeah, it's gonna be fun. We'll see what happens in the first games that are coming up here. So yeah, lots of fun.
Should be a blast.